completing 36 years of fighting in defense of our lives and human rights, society, children, the elderly, special needs. Being a targeted individual is first and foremost being a victim. I believe there are errors regarding this indisputable truth. These are 36 years in which, to continue our lives, and to help ourselves and also, to help each victim who arrived every day. We needed to have strength, to have knowledge of the unknown, to have knowledge in technology, science, laboratories, history, terrorism, Nazism. Torture methods authorized by international organizations, it was and is necessary to research our defenses and those of other human beings, tirelessly, day and night. Subjected to torture, vile and degrading treatment, persecution, insults, accusations, defamation, slander, electronic rape, psychological abuse, the victims became guinea pigs in laboratories of various sciences. Mainly legal, military and investigative, in addition to the torture promoted by the teams on the victims. Resources and invisible enemies are used that cannot be pointed out and taken to a police station. As the system they use to torture is the monitoring system approved by all global societies in the area, commercial, in homes, and is not considered an invader who monitors the movements of victims within their homes to subject them to greater intensity of torture and mental and psychological pain. In addition to electronic rapes continued without interruption, given the truth of the existence of violent practices outside that melee segment, through technology, chips, synthetic telepathy, all these devices are real, scientific and have nothing metaphysical, spiritual or paranormal. Telepathy is through of synthesizers, therefore, no victim is a paranormal being. This argument is purely false and untrue. TI victims, individual targets, are human beings enlisted to be abused in experiments, torture and sexual abuse, and became part of the capital to continue the torture, that is, organized crime sustained the concentration camp. Experiments and torture with the pain inflicted on victims in all degrees of man's abominable and unimaginable acts, even with all his modernity, giving these victims to the elite clientele, who, by of course, they are eccentric and extremely inhumane. The victims are world records for suffering due to electronic rapes. No victim has ever been able to number the rapes they suffered, and they were unable to count the shifts or enumerate the masculine timbres of the voices that lined up to take their turn. Within the family home, work, school, college, church, there was no environment in which victims were spared from rape and sexual violence. And with superhuman efforts they managed to continue their journey in conditions inferior to any other human being. Many victims were considered to have mental problems. Subjected to psychiatric treatment, forced to take controlled medications for having declared the truth and what the criminals, organized crime were doing to them, victims. The professionals in the field, in addition to being involved, were conniving and participated in the experiments, and were convinced that the victims were crazy. Sometimes by family members and even by the police. Several victims recorded videos, declaring themselves, exposing themselves. And thousands of publications took over social networks not only in Brazil, but around the world, but the press that thinks it is democratic, liberal, TV and radio stations do not provided the slightest support, and many victims suffered losses in their lives due to the truth revealed. But it was the only way to welcome and try to bring the truth and a little peace of mind to the new victims who presented themselves as aged between 14 and 70. All over the world, the experiences that this criminal and experimental organization, experiences that led to suicide young and old, had such suicides in their reports as positive results. And young people preferred to commit suicide rather than continue to suffer pain and abuse. Today, I am writing this article because there is a movement around all the abominable practices they have committed over the years in which different people were involved. On the part of the criminal organization, and this movement is to disqualify complaints, statements. In an attempt to prevent all participants in torture and laboratories from going unpunished before international criminal courts, and the human rights resolution, as well as before society. Therefore, I leave this warning and that you do not give up the conviction of true justice, despite the neurocerebral process, and all the resources applied to the victims, such as control and loss of memory, chronological inability to describe the facts, memory of timbres for voice recognition, checking the voices of acquaintances, noted facts, signs, names, addresses, occurrences, phrases heard, content heard, don't unarchive, don't give up, and above all, don't trust each other's memory and files. The system operates in the animus domini. Each person's own domain incapacitates the victim for anything that could incriminate the system, raises forces against the victim and has a connection with the victim, both psychic and organic. With control over all areas of functioning of the human organism. Among the victims, I don't know how many have a history of mental problems, drug use and hospitalizations. Among the combat veterans, no one had any of these problems, but groups formed and people with all these stories began to arrive. The criminal organization may have organized this entire movement to try to justify the unjustifiable. Under the allegation that everyone was involved with drugs and were in the process of treatment, and jokingly classifying torture as therapeutic processes, in fact, it would be the first time that a criminal organization would present uninterrupted rapes as sex therapy. This is not about irony, but about trying to show how dangerous this criminal organization is, unlimitedly powerful, dominating and which has supreme powers not only in Brazil, but throughout the world. The desiccation of a human piece yields a lot for this organization. I reinforce my request for everyone, victims and activists, to be careful with their lives, safety and organize themselves. Gather their writings, print them with the date, the computer offers this resource, time, and make a folder and keep them in a safe place. The judiciary does not accept pen drives, but rather floppy disks. Download